sequencing gets easier, it makes more sense, it gets more fun, it gets more cohesive, it builds the trust between students and teachers.
Welcome to the All Matt's Taken podcast. I'm your host, Adrian Jarrett, and let me tell you, dear listeners, this final episode for 2025 has been an absolute doozy for me to get this out to you. A few months ago, we recorded it, and I was sick during the interview, so you might be able to hear that in my voice. But then during the final editing stages this week, trying to get it out on time, I fell sick again. And I just couldn't get it done. And then my baby's sleep has been super erratic. We went on holiday last week, which was amazing, but it's kind of like messed up all his sleep cycles. And it's also summer here in New Zealand, so it doesn't get dark till like 9:30. Apparently he only likes to sleep as soon as it's really dark outside, no matter how tired he is. So it's been an interesting transition into toddler years, to say the least. But obviously, I love absolutely all of it. It's just that with new challenges come new lessons. So I'm currently trying to record this intro, not getting us completely tangled in my mic wires, because apparently his mummy radar is very strong this week, and I cannot leave him for about 2 seconds without waking up and crying mama. So if you can hear any breathing or little noises come through, hopefully they won't make it into the final cut, but that's what that is. I apologize. Life and times of being a mum and a creator. So I have struggled to get this out, and I have been much less than today's wonderful guest deserves, but it is here and I'm very excited to share it with you. And while I haven't been on my best game with this one, I can assure you the incredible Charlotte Muller was. It was an absolute honor to get to sit down with Charlotte and discuss her signature sequencing framework known as foreshadowing. She is such a lovely human, and I know you are going to get so much out of this episode as we discuss what foreshadowing as a creative sequencing technique is and how it benefits both you as a teacher as well as your students, and also how Charlotte builds an engaged in-person and online community. Because if you are not familiar with Charlotte, definitely go check out her Instagram after this. She has amassed more than 54,000 followers at the time of recording, and you will quickly see why. She is so honest, and she creates just such fun content that really gets people commenting and chatting and engaging. She has both an in-person online studio for her students, and now she also is really passionate about helping fellow yoga teachers through her Sequencing Hub membership, which we'll get into a little bit more in this episode and how that all ties into her business, as we love to talk business on the podcast. But before we jump in, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has listened to and supported the show this year. It means the absolute world to me, and I wish you all a very happy holiday season and New Year's, however you celebrate or spend this time. I have some really fun, exciting interviews and solo episodes planned for next year that I can't wait to get to create and share them all with you. So thank you so much for encouraging me and giving me the motivation and reason to create. I really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. All right, now let's get into today's interview with Charlotte. Welcome, Charlotte. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm very excited to deep dive into everything sequencing, which you are just a genius at. So, thank you. Welcome to the podcast. And I'd love to start with just your story. Like, when did you first fall in love with sequencing? And was there a particular class or like teacher that it really clicked for you? Or is this something that has developed for you over time?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And I could talk about sequencing for hours. So the fact that you're giving me an opportunity to feels really good. I fell in love with sequencing around when I first started really taking yoga seriously. I had lost my mom in 2010, and as part of the grieving process and to navigate my own health condition, I was actually diagnosed with the same condition that took my mom's life. It's called familial hypercholesterolemia, and it's genetically really high cholesterol. And I look super healthy on the outside. I'm very petite. Like you would never know that I have clogging arteries, but that's just my genetics. So in grieving the loss of my mom and grieving kind of like the life that I thought I'd have, like the healthy life, I found yoga and fitness and wellness. And I just really knew that I needed to take wellness seriously for my own well being. So I prioritized like high intensity interval training and cardio and all of those fun types of workouts. And I went to my first yoga class to kind of supplement those. I went to prioritize flexibility. And back then, I thought yoga was just stretching. I didn't think it was really an art form. But after a couple classes, I just fell in love with the way that it felt to move around my yoga mat. And I do have a small background as a dancer, nothing professional or anything, but, kick line in grade school. And there was this element of choreography I felt moving through specific classes, specifically like vinyasa classes, that just made me feel really good. And after falling in love with the philosophy behind yoga and continuing to come back and roll out my mat, I realized that I wanted to teach. And so I enrolled in my 200-hour teacher training and learned everything I could in those 200 hours about teaching a great class. And when I started to actually teach public classes, I realized, wow, I can choreograph, if you will, within the mat, and I can create experiences that can help people move through not only physical postures but emotional experiences. And so it just kind of evolved into a way of telling stories through movement, for my own practice and for the students that I teach.
That's beautiful. I love that for someone that's maybe new to teaching or new to the idea of creative sequencing, how would you describe creative sequencing?
Yeah, I think that creative sequencing, the phrase itself is such a buzz phrase, because nowadays, if you look on Instagram or social media, everybody is like creative sequencing, and it almost kind of loses its magic because it's so watered down. So, in my opinion, I think that bringing creativity to sequences is really letting the teacher in you, whoever's designing the sequence come through. And that's adding a little bit of personality, whether it be through Dharma talks, through fun transitions, through certain poses or hybrid poses or made up things. But the idea of bringing individuality into asana, into the poses, is really where I think creativity comes into play.
You talk a lot about foreshadowing. How did that develop within your sequencing?
Yeah, I think I'm so obsessed with foreshadowing in terms of sequencing. If you're listening to the podcast and you don't know what foreshadowing is, it's basically introducing like a little teaser or a bite-sized piece of what's coming later on in the class, earlier on, like during the warm-up. And this is a technique that I use in every single class that I sequence. And it's something that I've built my business around and really have helped yoga teachers all over the world kind of master. Um, and so I believe that when we're creating our sequences, when we're writing this story on the mat, if you will, there's got to be this kind of lead up to where we're going. And foreshadowing is different than just warming up the body properly. Like, let's say you were teaching a class that the peak pose was a full split. Foreshadowing would be a half split, right? That's half of what we're working towards. But warming somebody up could be like a forward fold. So that's kind of where the two differ. Foreshadowing is more just like taking the bigger pose or the transition or the Dharma talk, whatever it is that we're foreshadowing, and scaling it down, down, down to give just a little bit of a tease of what's to come. Um, so foreshadowing for me, I was introduced to it in my 200-hour teacher training with my teacher, Millard Roper. And he is an incredible yoga teacher. He's not currently teaching, but he would teach amazing classes and they all felt super cohesive. And he would always include these elements that kind of teased where we were going. And because of that, I don't even think I named that I was doing that. I don't even think I was really introduced to the term foreshadowing. Um, but it was always just the backbone of the sequence for me. And it wasn't until recently, like it's July of 2025 now, it probably wasn't, um, maybe it was just over a year ago that I really named what I was doing when I was teaching my first 200-hour teacher training and I was teaching the sequencing module to my students. We talked about what makes a solid class. And that's really where I named, okay, foreshadowing. And I got to give that whole lesson to my students, and we workshopped it and how to foreshadow different poses. And it really became and blossomed into this almost like movement within the yoga teaching community online, where yoga teachers are realizing, oh, this can actually be a backbone and a scaffolding of what I create fully. So, yeah, I was introduced to it way back when in my 200-hour, but I really got comfortable and named it just over a year ago.
Cool. I didn't realize it was like quite so new that you've put that name to it. And Dharma talks.
I think that you can foreshadow anything. And I say anything loosely, like obviously we can foreshadow physical poses. That's one of the most popular ways to foreshadow, but there's technique in foreshadowing Dharma talks, and that can be as simple as like introducing an anecdote early on in class when you have your students in meditation, and then telling the story throughout the flow. Maybe you have them in downward facing dog halfway through the class, and then you get halfway through the story. And then at the end is really where the grand finale comes. It's just like you'd see in a movie, like the foreshadowing happens early on and then you resolve later on. So you can foreshadow poses, you can foreshadow Dharma talks, you can foreshadow transitions, breath techniques, all of it. And it's a very, very intelligent way to teach.
I think that's quite powerful so that they can realize it throughout the class on their own. What impacts does this technique have on the students in the class?
Yeah, I think foreshadowing helps students feel comfortable with where they're going. It gives them a solid foundation so that as we progress, they know that, okay, I've actually built where I'm going from the ground up. I've done a little bit of what she's cueing later. So I know if I can't fully do what she's cueing later, I can go back to that little bit. So it really prepares our students physically for what's to come. But I also think it's deeper than that. I think that foreshadowing really deepens the connection and the bond between student and teacher. Because when students feel as if classes have a purpose and have intention behind them, they trust their teachers more. Like I've been to classes before where I walk in and I can tell the teacher is winging it. And I can tell that they are just teaching on the fly, and students feel that. And it's such a different energy than walking into a studio and having the teacher totally set the scene, totally prepare us physically, emotionally, mentally, like for what's to come. It makes students feel held. It makes students feel appreciated, and it really increases the value of yoga classes. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm spending money to be away from my family and away from my hobbies, and I'm choosing to be in a yoga studio, I want to feel like I belong, and I want to feel like I'm getting um, a purposeful experience rather than just going in and being told to like go from down dog to plank to vinyasa with no real rhyme or reason.
Hmm. Do you find there's a difference in that with teachers that are maybe teaching in like big sort of studios that don't really get paid very well versus more entrepreneurial teachers that are at building their own business effectively?
Yeah, so I think what I've noticed in my 12 or so years of teaching is that when there's an intrinsic motivation to teach, classes are more well thought out. And if teachers don't wanna be there, if teachers kind of feel like they're just a number and they're getting paid minimum wage and they have to do all of these extra jobs, like clean the studio, check your students in, like, we're asked to do a lot, and if they don't feel valued, there's almost that kind of block of, "Okay, why am I gonna show up? Why am I gonna put hours and hours into planning my classes if I'm really not valued myself here?" So I do notice that teachers who have more of a deeper connection to their offerings, their teaching, put more of that time and attention into their classes. Um, and there are definitely levels to it. Like I said before, some teachers don't really feel valued by the studio that they teach at, so they're like, why would I want to put in extra effort? But on the flip side, there are teachers who they don't care what they get paid. They are there to serve their students. And those are really the types of teachers that I love to work with because I mean, it's such a balance because it is a business, but it also is a soul's, journey to share this practice with our students. So, I guess long-winded way of saying what I've noticed is when teachers feel valued, they put more effort into their classes, but there is that cohort of teachers who will show up and give it their all no matter what, and I find the people that are putting in more of that time and energy and effort into sequencing often do include those foreshadowing aspects.
Hmm. Can you walk me through your process for, like, how someone might start it? Like, what sparks the idea? How does that process work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first step is the hardest because the first step is coming up with that initial spark of inspo. And that could be, maybe you're scrolling on Instagram and you come across a sequence and you're like, oh my gosh, I love this sequence of poses. I'm going to build on this. It might be you come up with one pose and you're like, ooh, I want to build on this. It might be that you have a spark of inspiration about a class theme, and maybe that's like heart opening, and you're like, oh, I know I want to build on heart opening. So it's so hard to give you the first step because the first step is so variable. It's really the first step is inspiration. And that's just coming to your mat, rolling it out, and deciding how you want to start. So let's say, all right, I know I'm going to start with the, I know I'm feeling inspired to teach a class about half moon. That's my favorite pose ever. Um, then what I would do is I roll out my mat and I warm myself up, not necessarily foreshadow half moon. I just kind of warm my body up for half moon. And then I do half moon. And I stay there and I breathe for a little bit and I explore the pose and I think about, okay, what are the elements of this shape? Where do I need to be open? What hip is externally rotated? What hip is neutral? Where am I bracing? Where do I need strength? Where do I need length? So I come up with, okay, all of these different elements that make up half moon. And then I choose one of them. So let's say the element that I chose, half moon, is tricky because the externally rotated hip is actually the one on the bottom. So if my left leg is lifted, my grounded right leg is the one that's externally rotated. So let's say, you know what, I'm going to focus in on the element of external rotation in my hips. That just gave me so much unlocked in my mind of what I can create because now I know that I'm creating a class all around external rotation of the hips. So that could be, okay, starting on my back and introducing kind of like butterfly legs, like open up your knees out to the side, introducing external rotation. And that is a way to foreshadow half moon in a really subtle, non-specific way. That's me cueing and teaching about external rotation. And then as we move up from the ground and find tabletop, we have more actions of the hips and teaching about, okay, external versus internal versus neutral. Um, but really that like first initial spark of inspiration and then studying that inspiration will lay the foundation for everything to sequence around. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I can see how you could go in so many different directions with that as well. So maybe like it's not the external rotation you pick, maybe it's the balance aspect or something like that. And then that will have a completely different sequence. So you could have, I don't know, numerous different sequences just for the half moon using that technique.
Yeah, the limit does not exist.
How much time do you typically spend doing this process to develop a class?
My classes, I probably spend about an hour and a half to 2 hours per class, um, which is not the luxury that a lot of yoga teachers have. I'm lucky because I teach yoga full time, but I only teach 4 classes a week, you know what I mean? So I am considering myself a full-time yoga teacher because I have an online business too. So I do have the luxury of really intentionally spending 2 hours on my yoga mat to create 1 hour experience. Um, but I do recognize and I wanna name that I know so many yoga teachers don't have that luxury of really pouring that amount of time into it.
Do you always create new sequences for every class, or do you recycle them and you kind of have like a big bank that you go to? Because that's like a lot of time and effort to put into one class.
It's a lot, yeah. So what I do is I create 1 sequence a week, and I'll use that sequence, for all of my classes that week, and if I'm teaching, like, a vinyasa and then a slow flow, I'll use that same sequence, but I'll just modify it to meet the need of a slow flow class. So instead of cueing 1 breath per movement, I'm having my students stay in this elongated 8 breath per movement, pace throughout. So it's 2 hours of work that I can then use for 4 classes.
That makes sense. I guess it depends for the teacher how many classes they're teaching a week to get it. But I can imagine you could like spend time and create 6 of these and just recycle those, and most people are probably not gonna notice by the time you get to the 6th or the 8th that it's the same one that they did 6 weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
Do you use foreshadowing, like, if you had, say, a block of classes that were all themed together, could you foreshadow within that whole group?
Oh, for sure. I think you could foreshadow in, like, a 10-minute block, you could foreshadow in a 10-hour block. It's kinda like a movie and a TV show. It's like some movies are 4 hours long, and there's that foreshadowing, ooh, all throughout. And it's the same thing with a series. Like, I taught recently, um, a heart-opening series where at the end of the series, we did the peak pose of fish, and, like, the first of the 4 weeks or 6 weeks, I forget how many weeks it was, but regardless, it was a series. The first class, we just did a tiny little supported fish, and that's it. And then the next week, okay, we, put the blocks a little bit higher, and we did a deeper version of fish. Okay, that's it. And then by that final class, I they had built all of the foundation, like, all of the building blocks to really open up and feel comfortable in fish pose because it's an intense back bend. Um, but I was able to foreshadow that throughout the span of whatever it was, 4 or 6 weeks, to get that full expression of fish, and the cool thing is our students were super warmed up for it in terms of, like, week by week, that they knew they could stop at any point. They knew they could hang out in week 1's version. They knew they could chill in week 3's version, or they could explore and try and push themselves to that final version that they've been prepping for and foreshadowed.
I can see how that would help, like, the mental side for the student as well, because some of the, like, more, I'll say, advanced, for lack of a better word, postures or deeper postures, you know your students can do them depending on how much work you've done with them, but it's just, like, the idea of them is intimidating.
Yeah.
So, even just building it up and then that just, like, chips away at that so that when you offer the bigger version at the end, then they might actually be like, "Oh, I'll give it a go."
Yeah, and it's funny, like, sometimes our students, they don't realize what they're capable of until they just do tiny little baby steps, and sometimes all it takes is for you, the teacher, to be like, "I see you. I've watched you the past 3 weeks. You're ready to try this." Um, and that's our job. It's our job to really hold that safe space and be the eyes that can see the potential in our students physically, as well as emotionally, mentally, all of it, spiritually. But being that safe physical guide to get them to where maybe they're not super comfortable going, but we know that it's safe for them to be.
I think that's a good point. Where do you think teachers tend to get stuck when they start to develop their own sequences?
I think that usually the starting point is where a lot of people get stuck. That initial spark of inspiration, um, and I also think that we get comfortable, and maybe we have this like safe type of sequence or safe type of class, and we do it over and over and over. And I'm not necessarily talking about the same exact combination of poses within classes, but the same way of sequencing, like start in a seat, come to a table, cat and cow, downward dog, sun salutations. I think that it's super easy to get stuck in routine, which is why I really value and I really, every yoga teacher that I work with and that I chat with, I always make sure that they are prioritizing their practice because when we're taking class with other teachers, our eyes are opened to like different ways of sequencing and it helps us get out of that routine, get out of that kind of hamster wheel of like, this is how I do it. This is how I do it. Because that's where the creativity is when we kind of sit with, okay, what am I working with today and how can I bring that to the yoga mat? So yeah, it's that initial spark of inspiration to like get started, which sometimes it's just not there and we feel like we're in a creative rut and we're just like, okay, I'm just not sequencing. I'm just going to do what I did last week. So easy to give up. But on the other end of that, like staying through that or having a resource to give you that initial spark of inspiration, there is so much, like such a vast amount of where we can go and what we can do. It's just about breaking through that little barrier of stagnation and comfort.
From like a physical asana perspective, any like types of movement or postural types that tend to get missed that are really needed to sort of complete a balanced class?
Yeah, I mean, I think that poses and counter poses are very important. A lot of teachers will teach, let's say like a back bending class, a heart opening class, and they spend so much time opening the heart that they're not balancing it out with rounding and opening through the back of the body. So there's that like aspect of pose and counter pose. When I was teaching my 200-hour yoga teacher trainees, I assigned them to sequence a class around hamstring opening. And I think we did like 2 of the hamstring opening classes in one day. So maybe it was like an hour and a half worth of hamstring opening sequencing. And I think 2 or 3 of us, myself included as the teacher, strained our hamstrings that weekend because it was so focused on open that we're not quite focusing on opening up the opposing muscle and shortening the hamstring rather than lengthening it. So, yeah, that safety aspect of just balancing out um, pose versus counter pose, I think is where a lot of teachers kind of miss the mark and and it's not really talked about. It's not a widely educated about topic in terms of like anatomy. So I think that's important for teachers to understand is like how am I actually benefiting my students and creating a well-rounded experience by opening and closing.
Yeah, I feel like it's something that just gets touched on rather than taught in depth. Like, here's the posture. Oh yeah, and do this to do the opposite afterwards for a minute or something.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of your students that are learning the foreshadowing, what transformations have you seen in them and their teaching once they've mastered and adopted this foreshadowing creative style?
I have like a folder on my phone, my favorites folder of like all of the messages that I get about like what you just asked me. And the number one thing I hear is just like, when I learned how to foreshadow, my teaching transformed. And it's so like surface level because you just say, okay, how did it transform? But it transforms. Sequencing gets easier. It makes more sense. It gets more fun. It gets more cohesive. It builds the trust between students and teachers. Um, So I've seen such a beautiful, beautiful emergence of confident yoga teachers once they start sequencing. I mean, once they start foreshadowing. Um, because really, if you think about it, like foreshadowing requires us to be students about whatever it is we're foreshadowing, right? If I'm foreshadowing, like I said, half moon, I am learning everything that I can about half moon. I'm being a student about that pose so that when I teach, I'm teaching from a place of mastery, right? I know, okay, the external rotated hip is the one on the bottom. My chest has to open, my glute medius has to kind of engage to lift. Like there's so much opportunity for us to master what we're teaching when we're intentionally foreshadowing. So yeah, confidence and preparation, I feel, and like time saved are the three most bullet points I feel that I get from yoga teachers who start foreshadowing.
Imagine the way you're describing it, it would help with your cueing skills as well,
1000%.
because you're really focused on how the pose looks.
Yeah, and you know it, you know the pose inside and out, and you know the preparation inside and out, and that's the thing, when we're comfortable with what we're teaching, we could teach it with our eyes closed. I think that it's super valuable as yoga teachers to be able to teach walking around rather than just staying on our mat and demoing the whole time, and that comes with knowing what we're teaching inside and out. That comes with foreshadowing, being able to walk around and cue by looking rather than feeling because we've already done the feeling and we've done the exploring and the mastery beforehand.
And I imagine that would also help if you have to like change something last minute in class.
Absolutely.
For anyone wanting to learn about it, how do you help people learn this in your sequencing hub?
Yeah. So I have a membership for yoga teachers called the Sequencing Hub. And it is a place where you get one sequence a week that's completely done for you and foreshadow focused. So this is something that you can download. It's completely ready to be taught. You copy and paste the PDF sequence right into your notes app, and you practice it on your mat, and you bring it to your class, and you teach it. And I've got reference videos and teaching notes, like everything that you need for each sequence. Um, and a lot of teachers come in and like I said before, they don't have that 2 hours to spend on their yoga mat to sequence. So they come in and they download the sequence that I've spent 2 hours on, and they know that this is a class that's balanced. This is a class that includes foreshadowing. This is a class that has been well thought out. So they don't have to stress about it. They don't have to worry, okay, am I actually um, teaching something that's going to benefit my students or not. So a lot of teachers will come in and teach the exact class totally with a cute little bow on it, like start to finish. They'll teach it. They don't have to think about anything. Other teachers come in and they use the hub for that initial spark of inspiration that we talked about before. So they'll look at my sequence, they'll watch the reference video, and they'll say, "Ooh, I like this. And I want to make this a little bit more me. I want to change this. I want to adapt this a little bit." So the hub itself has a few different elements within it. It has the full done for you class plans, and then it has something called the sequencing lab. And the sequencing lab is tiny little vignettes from each sequence. So maybe it's the warm up, maybe it's the awakening section, maybe it's the heat building, the cool down, the foreshadow section. But it's all broken down for teachers to go in and browse and say, "Ooh, I wanna take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this," and they make their own. So the lab is more for teachers who love to do it themselves and have an understanding of how to create a balanced class and how to keep it safe and cohesive. And then the done for you section is for teachers who might need a little bit of assist with that. They might lack the confidence to fully create their own classes. And what's cool is like even teachers who are coming to just use the complete done for you sequence, they are learning just by using that already class. They're learning, okay, what makes a balanced class? What safely warms up students for this? So it's a really cool place. And it has continuing education resources. We do workshops. We do monthly, we call sequencing chats, where we talk about things like this. And we talk about topics within the yoga world and how to get better as teachers. and we connect. And it's a community. So I've got a little over 1,000 yoga teachers right now from all over the world that are all united and all have the common interest of creative, fun, cohesive classes.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'll put the link to that in the show notes for anyone that is interested. And I also want to highlight, because we talk about yoga business here on the podcast, that initially anyone that was like, oh my gosh, she spends 2 hours to plan this every week, listen to Charlotte's savviness on how she repurposes that. So it's not just she uses it in her studio. I imagine you've then got it recorded for your online membership for like students just practicing with you as well.
Yeah, so we live stream every class that we teach. So the 2 hours that I spend sequencing, yeah, my students get it, 1 hour on their mat, but then it is completely transformed to go into the hub. It is, available for more teachers to teach. Like, that is my big business is sequencing and helping other teachers sequence. So I do have the time and means to focus on it because that is what my business is.
Yeah, that's very cool. Because you started off in person,
Mhm.
just your studio, correct?
Yeah.
And what's something that surprised you about translating that online, or did you find that quite seamless?
Yeah, I mean, I morphed to online with COVID. I had opened my studio 4 months before COVID hit, and I was paying rent in New York City, commercial rent, which is not cheap, so I knew I had to do something quick. So March 15th, we closed the studio. March 16th, I put everything online. It was like instant, instant, instant. And what surprised me the most was how adaptive, um, people can be with virtual yoga. Like, you think about, okay, yoga, and it's this Zen environment where everything is curated for you. It smells good, it's quiet. But the real practice is not that. The real practice is taking all of the philosophy and implementing it into a non-perfect environment. So to watch my students on the screen, I mean, I still have a physical in-person studio. I have reopened 2 years later. But to watch my students on the screen, whether it's like in real time or kind of videos of them taking a pre-recorded class, the um, mindfulness and the dedication that they still have to their practice, despite them being at home, has surprised me the most.
It's a good way and to think about it, and it is yoga. Yoga is life. It's not this perfect curated setting that we go to.
Yeah.
One of the key values in your business you've talked about is getting to know your students really personally. How do you translate that online as well and really get people engaged in that setting?
Yeah. So are you referring to like students, like taking my class, or the yoga teachers that I
Both.
both?
Yeah, like how do you just generally keep that engagement and that personalization in the online space? Because that can be a bit tricky getting people to interact online.
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah. When people join my membership, I have them introduce themselves. So we have this little introduction tab within the sequencing hub where you write where you are, what you teach, when you got certified, why you joined in the first place. And it's a cool place for people to be like, "Oh, I also live in the UK. I also live in Michigan." Like, there's a lot of connection that happens just by knowing where people physically are, even though we're not physically together. Um, but I also find, like, when I'm teaching in real time and I have people on Zoom, I know their name. I call their name out. Like, I compliment them by name. Like, "Jenna, that downward dog looks awesome. Lengthen your spine a little bit." Like, all people really need, all our students really need from us is to be seen and to be valued, and that comes with personalization. And I also find that Instagram is such an awesome community building space. Like, I try to follow all of my students. You know, if you've DM'd me, you've taken my class, you've been part of the hub, like, I am following you, I am cheering you on, I am looking at what's going on in your life and being part of it, because that's really where true connection happens. It's not just like the 1 hour spent doing the class. It's the 23 hours beyond that.
Do you have any systems in place for that in terms of knowing who's who to be able to track them on Instagram?
No, I mean, when people join the hub, I say, "Write your Instagram handle," and I will follow them, but it really just takes time for me to be on the app and see who's popping up and associate face with name, name with student, student with hub member or not hub member. Like it's a lot of mental. I wish I had a system, but I don't.
You can add people to your closed friends list as well. I wonder if that's
Ooh.
something you could do. And then I don't know how that works in terms of your feed. I haven't done it, but I have a friend that uses that feature. And then in your stories, when it goes green around the ring, and then only your closed friends list can see those stories.
That's brilliant.
And then I wonder if then you can go back and see those people.
No, that's a great idea. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Well, before we wrap up, I do have a few rapid fire questions for you. What is one marketing strategy that you have found that worked much better than you expected it to?
ManyChat. Have you heard of ManyChat?
Yes, I used that for the summit.
Oh my gosh, it is like a game changer. I've always seen it as like a just a social media user and somebody's like comment, flow and receive this. The second I started using it and I pay for like the $25 a month version now because it gives me so many leads and it's so easy. You just say write whatever it is down below. So that surprised me. Originally I didn't think it would lead to a lot, but this when I started using it in my business, my numbers boomed like a very obvious increase.
Cool, good tip. And I think there is like a free tier to try it as well.
Yeah.
I'll pop that in the show notes as well. And are you utilizing any AI in your business 2025? If yes, what? If no, why not?
I love AI and I hate AI because it you know what I'm noticing? Everybody sounds the same. Everybody sounds like ChatGPT. I'm reading somebody's caption and I'm like, "You didn't write this." I'm reading somebody's email, I'm like, "You didn't write this." It is just so obvious to me. So it makes me cringe when I see everybody having the same brand voice. But I'm not against the tool itself. So I'll use like ChatGPT. If I have, let's say like I'm thinking about a class that I'm going to teach and I've been through, let's see, what's a recent example? A recent example, I would say, there was this situation that happened. My husband and I were in an Uber, and long story short, the Uber driver said, "If it gets too cold in here, tell me it's too cold." And it was too cold in there, and I didn't tell him it was too cold. And eventually, I made my husband, after like an hour, I made my husband tell him it was too cold. And the driver said, "Oh my gosh, thank goodness I've been cold for like an hour." So it was this like silly little like situation that happened that I was like, I know I can turn this into a Dharma talk. So I wrote that situation into ChatGPT and I said, "Here's the situation. I want to make this into a theme for my class. What yoga sutra um, would you would you connect with a situation like this?" So it's really great at just like connecting the philosophy with like the real life examples, and then giving like little class theme ideas. But I never ever have it write my talks for me because you can tell. So it can give me like a little prompt and then I can say, "Cool, now I have something to run with," and then I run with it. Um, so yeah, I love it and I hate it.
Answer. I love that use for it though, because it's pattern recognition software effectively. So that is a awesome use. I'm gonna do that. And yes, it is very obvious. You should be editing everything that comes out of ChatGPT and training it in your voice and then editing it as well. And I think it's gonna become more and more obvious if it isn't to everyone already. Please don't copy and paste from ChatGPT or Claude or any of them. And if you could go back to when you first started teaching and pass on a piece of advice to younger you, what would that be?
This is a great question. I would tell her the future is so much bigger than you can ever imagine. Stay with what lights you up. Keep going with what gets you excited. Because that's exactly what landed me where I am. And for so long, I was like, what am I doing? But I kept going and I figured it the heck out.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful advice. Thank you so much. And for everyone that wants to connect with you and learn more from you, how can we find you?
Yeah, I'm all over Instagram. It's at breathe_strength. And then my website is breathestrengthwellness.com.
Awesome. I will make sure that those are linked in the show notes for everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today, Charlotte. It has been amazing getting to deep dive into sequencing, and I'm sure everyone has some awesome ideas on how they can start adapting these into their practices and their teaching.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the All Mats Taken podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit follow, like, subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, leave us a review, and share with a teacher friend. This really helps others find the show so we can continue growing our yoga-loving tribe. I am endlessly grateful for all your support. Have a beautiful day, and I'll see you next time.